When looking through NBA history, we've seen tons of all-time great players who can fill it up and put the ball in the basket. And we're looking for unique talents who can score. Allen Iverson and James Harden are definitely at the top of that list. And in recent years, both these players have been in heated debates, arguing which player is better and who has the greater overall legacy. So in today's video, we're going to look at that heated debate, and I'll give my take as to why Allen Iverson is the better overall player compared to James Harden. Now, like in all my player comparison videos, comparing two players from different eras, it can be difficult. When looking at Allen Iverson, his prime was in the early 2000s, and James Harden was in the late 2010s. In the simplest terms of years, they aren't that far apart, but in terms of play styles in both those leagues, it couldn't be more different. And I would argue Allen Iverson in his prime played the tougher NBA. Looking at this graphic on the screen right now, we have Allen Iverson's 8 years in his prime with the Philadelphia 76ers. And what I did for each of those seasons, I ranked the NBA's league average when it came to points from lowest to highest. And on the furthest column, you have the rank in NBA history of how low that scoring was. Looking at 1999, 04, 01, 03, and 02, there's all the top 5 lowest scoring seasons in NBA history. Even looking at 06 and 05, they're still top 10, and even 2000 is at 11. So to put this into context, 8 out of the 11 lowest scoring years in NBA history came during Allen Iverson's prime in his playing days. And doing the exact same thing, just for pace of play, once again you have some staggering numbers, as Iverson has 7 out of the 10 lowest pace seasons in NBA history. Once again, the NBA at this point was really bogged down, it was ISO heavy, and defense was undoubtedly better than it was in the late 2010s during James Harden's prime. It's not an insult to James Harden, but in AI's era, it was harder to score and harder to put up gaudy stats and points. And once again, talking about prime Allen Iverson when it came to scoring, he was one of the best, if not the best players in the entire NBA. And looking at his prime resume, he's a 7-time All-Star, 7-time All-NBA member, 3-time first team, a 4-time scoring champ, a 3-time steals leader, and a 5 times minutes leader. Allen Iverson for an 8-year stretch was playing 43 minutes per game, putting up 30 points as a 6-foot shooting guard in the toughest defensive era in NBA history. And even looking more in depth at his scoring, during his prime, he had 12 games of 50 plus points, that was most in the NBA, 78 games of 40 plus points, once again the most, and 292 games of 30 plus points, also the most. That was in an era with Kobe, Shaq, T-Mac, and some other all-time great scorers. And once again during that time period, he's a 4-time scoring champ, averaging nearly 30 points per game for an 8-year stretch. Now looking at all those stats and accolades, they are very impressive, but what really matters is how good you are when it comes to playoffs. And when looking at both Iverson and Harden, they have their ups as well as their downs. And once again for AI, his prime in the playoffs was 99 to 06. For James Harden, it's from 2012 to 2021. That's a pretty good sample size to compare both these players as playoff performers. Looking at Iverson, he averaged 30.6 points per game, 6.1 assists, 4.2 boards, 2.2 steals on 40% shooting. Harden averaged 27.6 points per game, 7.2 assists, 5.7 boards, 1.9 steals on 42% shooting. Once again, looking at the raw stat numbers for these players, it's definitely pretty comparable. And being an objective viewer, I would say Iverson has the better overall raw stat numbers. Once again, that's without context of era or how tough the defense was in AI's time. Now later in this video, we'll delve into their best playoff runs, but I think looking at both these players, as general playoff performers, it's definitely very close, and Allen Iverson has a slight edge over James Harden. Once again, looking at their prime stats, Allen Iverson in Game 7s averages 32.5 points per game, 11.5 assists, 5.0 boards, 2.0 steals on 42% shooting. James Harden only averages 25.5 points per game, 8.0 assists, 6.3 boards, 2.5 steals on a pitiful 35% shooting. So I think that right there is pretty important to show Iverson is much better in the biggest games in the playoffs, as James Harden routinely chokes and folds when it comes to the biggest moments. And looking at both these players' careers in total when it comes to playoffs, Allen Iverson has more 50-point games, more 40-point games, a higher scoring average, a higher assist average, a higher Game 7 scoring average, as well as a higher scoring average when it comes to the NBA Finals. Once again, on the biggest stage, in the biggest moments, Allen Iverson is simply the better overall player. Now, like I said earlier in the video, we're going to look at both these players at their absolute peaks. And what better comparison to make than their MVP seasons. For Allen Iverson, that was in 01, where he averaged 31 points per game and led his team to 56 wins in the tough Eastern Conference. For James Harden, that was back in 2018, where his team won a staggering 65 games. Also that year, Harden made the Western Conference Finals versus the Golden State Warriors. Objectively speaking, both those years were the best years of these players' careers in terms of team success, accolades, as well as overall stats. And when doing the playoff comparison, Allen Iverson averaged 32.9 points per game, 6.1 assists, 4.7 boards, 2.4 steals on 39% shooting. James Harden averaged 28.6 points per game, 6.8 assists, 5.2 boards, 2.2 steals on 41% shooting. Once again, the stats for both these players is definitely pretty comparable. And one thing I do find pretty important is looking at both these players in their biggest overall series. For Allen Iverson, that was the NBA Finals versus the Lakers, and for James Harden, in the Western Conference Finals versus the Golden State Warriors. Let's look at how both these players played in their biggest career series. Allen Iverson averaged 35.6 points per game, 2.8 assists, 5.6 boards, 1.8 steals on 41% shooting. In Game 1 of that series, he scored 48 points and beat LA at home for the only loss of the 01 postseason. Now looking at James Harden, his series, obviously the stakes were lower as he wasn't in the NBA Finals. And actually pretty important to note, in this series, the Rockets were up 3-2. And in typical Harden fashion, he would lose that series and not make the NBA Finals. And I do want to note, James Harden, in his final 2 games, averaged 32 points per game on 41% shooting the field and 24% from 3. He also added in 7 turnovers that didn't help for his team, blowing a 3-2 lead. Now, even with all that being said, you still might say James Harden had the better, even more impressive playoff run. But I think this next graphic will definitely change your mind if you think that. As Iverson in the 01 playoffs scored 723 total points, the 5th most in NBA history. He had 2 50-point games, which is tied for the most ever, 6 40-point games, tied for the 4th most ever, and 14 30-point games, once again tied for the 4th most ever. In Game 7 versus Milwaukee, he scored 44 points, the 8th most ever in a Game 7, and the NBA Finals had the 8th most points ever with 48. Also in that final series, he averaged 35.6 points per game, with the 9th highest average in Finals history. Taking all that into account, I think it's pretty obvious Allen Iverson, at his peak, was the better playoff performer with the better single playoff run. Compared to James Harden, he had more 50-point games, more 40-point games, as well as more 30-point games. And then nail in the coffin, in all 4 playoff series, from round 1 of the NBA Finals, he averaged above 30 points per game. That's 4 total series. In James Harden's entire career, he's only averaged 30 in a series twice. That's his whole career compared to 1 Allen Iverson playoff run. Now, also one thing not stat related I have to point out is that Allen Iverson is the more iconic figure with more iconic and signature moments. Of course, at number 1, you have him crossing Jordan. You have him scoring 48 points versus LA in Game 1, crossing Ty Lue. You have the 01 All-Star game, he led a 21-point comeback. You have his 44-point Game 7 versus the Bucks, where he led Philly to the finals for the first time since the early 80s. You have the iconic play versus Antonio McDaniels, where he crossed him not once, but twice. Looking at AI's career, he has iconic and signature moments. For an all-time great player, that's paramount to your legacy. When looking at James Harden, what's the one moment you look to as an iconic moment in his career? He's had plenty of good games, but no real iconic moments or signature play that defined his career. And like I said in the beginning of the video, these two players' eras were completely different. Once again, looking at both these players and the leagues they played at, here's some staggering stats. In Allen Iverson's prime, there were 55 teams that averaged 100 points per game. James Harden's NBA had 246, nearly 5 times more. Iverson had 13 teams, averaged 105 points per game, James Harden had 65. Once again, in Iverson's era, he had 5 teams average 110 points per game. James Harden had 38, nearly 4 times more. I think that right there shows you guys these two players' eras couldn't be more different. As in Iverson's era, the defense was much harder, it was harder to score, and being 6 feet tall in that era, averaging 30, is definitely highly impressive. Now, one last thing I do want to talk about is both these players and their teammate help. Looking at Iverson's best teammates, he had Carmelo Anthony, he had Jerry Stackhouse, Dikembe, Derek Coleman, as well as Chris Webber. Definitely some pretty good individual players who are all-star level. But looking at James Harden, the help he's had has been drastically higher. He's played with Kevin Durant twice, Westbrook twice, Kyrie Irving once, Chris Paul, as well as Dwight Howard. That list right there is absolutely stacked with top 50 all-time talent and some of the best players to ever play the game. Once again, with all that talent, he made one NBA Finals appearance when he wasn't even in his prime. Iverson, with his help, made the finals and even beat LA in a Game 1. Once again, that fact right there is a pretty big indictment on James Harden as a playoff performer. And to summarize, I think Allen Iverson, he played in the tougher era, he was better in the playoffs, had the better peak, and a better MVP season. He has a greater accomplishments, he did more with less. When it comes down to it, he's a more iconic figure compared to James Harden. He inspired a generation of players, the style of the NBA, and countless other things. James Harden, his offensive impact is definitely great. When it comes to being influential, he isn't on the level of someone like an Allen Iverson. So that right there is the overall summary of why Allen Iverson is a better overall player and a greater player than James Harden. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.